Digital Operations Excellence, Transforming Fulfillment for the Automated Economy. In this episode, Kramer, the founder of Cooperative Computing, explores how digital enablement is revolutionizing operations and order fulfillment. Through practical examples from warehouse automation to digital twins, you'll learn how to create predictable, efficient systems that satisfy customer demands while upskilling your workforce for the future. I'm your co-host Anthony Perl, and whether you're just starting your digital journey or looking to accelerate your existing efforts, it's time to get enabled digitally.
Kramer, let's get into the whole operations and fulfillment space, because it's a natural flow on from the sales space, which is a natural flow on from the marketing space. I think one of the biggest challenges here in getting enabled digitally is, to some degree, people allowing their hands to be taken off the wheel a little bit. But it's also knowing where and what to do and what are those crucial pain points to start from to work out from there.
So as you move from the marketing and branding to the sales and commerce to the operations, you're going to notice something about the people involved. Okay. You're right. Creative minds, but a little more structure, and then creative minds with lots of structure. Why? You never want to blow up $20 million rocket ship on the launch pad because someone had a leak in a fuel tank. Okay. That's an extreme side of something, but you never want that to happen as a result of what you're doing in operations. So operations people are not resistant to change. I do not agree with that. I think a lot of people think they are. What they're resistant to is unpredictable change. They don't want to put something in and not know the outcome of it. Why? Because the upstream effects are so drastic, especially if let's say you've got a single operations or order fulfillment center that's turning, let's say 500 million. That's a big number. Let's say 200 million. Okay. Let's just put it in perspective of 200 million. And if you're turning 200 million, and let's say that's 1/10 of your total revenues, and you botch that thing up, you've got everyone up and down that food chain, right? Not rightfully complaining that you can't do your job right. Because that's exactly what occurred. Why? Accountability at the operation. In marketing, you get away with, I sent out 100 and 2 of them worked. Okay. Account-based marketing all the time. I have no idea when the thing's going to work, but someday account-based marketing will work. So as you move down the food chain, that predictability has to go way up, and in operations. So they're not just resistant to change. That's not what they are. They're resistant to unpredictable change. So the question about how do we digitally enable operations? I think there's going to be some key constructs, and I'm going to start with 2. One, while it's painful, time-consuming, and maybe you can consider it costly, we've got to be able to animate our supply chain systems at the, I'm going to call it distribution, warehouse, and manufacturing level, and put that together in what is called a digital simulation. The fancy term is a digital twin. Now, digital twin means several things, so we got to be careful with that. But you've got to be able to understand what that flow looks like. You're not going to do that if you sell 100 things a year. Okay. So we're not talking about the guys that are, I've got a sister-in-law. She makes the best salsa you've ever tasted in your entire life. Okay. And she makes probably a batch of 300 bottles a month, friends, family. She sells them at some shops. Is she going to run out and put a digital twin together tomorrow? No. But if you're thinking about growth mind into the automated economy, and you're $100 million business, you better start thinking about what is it going to take to put that into a simulation model so I can understand in a predictable fashion between my operations people and my managers, what does it look like when I go do X, Y, or Z? And there's a couple different ways to approach that. Some of that is as a part of, for example, when you put robots into the plant that are in motion, AMRs, AGVs, things of that nature, you've got to tell those robots how to take the pass. And the difference between AMRs and AGVs is one's usually got a very structured path, and one has, brains in it that lets it kind of run around and do what it needs to do and get to the destination. But as you do that, you've got to have some sort of fleet management in place. And most people forget the fleet management, right? Now, the vendor comes in and tells them you better have fleet management. And they go, oh my gosh, what's that going to cost? It's $300,000 for it. Oh my gosh, I didn't put that in the budget. Well, you should have asked me ahead of time. So that digital component of understanding what's going to happen to make it predictable for those operations people to take you from where you're at today to where you need to go tomorrow, to where you go after that, to where you go after that in a predictable fashion, and understand the outcome economically that it's going to produce for you and how it's going to handle that. Let's say you have seasonality. So you're going to do things that actually call lift inside your sales. And you got to understand what that lift's going to do to that process. And can that process scale, or do I have to have a way to put multiple lines in to deal with what's coming in and out of that order fulfillment system? So when you digitally enable that thing, you've got to get predictability inside it. The tools to do the predictability are now fairly sophisticated. We work with a couple of different partners, and this is a key thing that we often do inside our customers to enable them to get ready for what they're going to have to do to scale. And the next thing past understanding how that wire up works in the digital twin is in knowing what that does from a effective use around your most precious asset, which is your people, your second most precious asset, which is your inventory, depending upon who you're talking to at the C-suite, those kind of shift around. But you've got to understand what those look like to make sure you can predictably do what you need to do on the order fulfillment side. So what does digital enablement look like? One, get predictability inside that operations hands, and they're going to be less resistant to the outcomes. Now, you're going to have some schmuck that's always resistant to change just because that's who they are and there's no shifting that, right? But the people that say, I don't mind change, I just want some predictability in what that change looks like, this is a way to get that inside their hands so that they can see it running, they can see what it looks like, they can play with it, they can run the scenarios, and they can do so without spending, a typical robot, an AGV or an AMR system, it's $100,000 to $200,000. So even if someone says, I'll give you a demo to let you test it out, you got to spend some time, you got to set it up, you got to get it wired up to the fleet management system, blah, 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 blah. So while that risk has gone down because it's much simpler to do today than it was in the past, it's still precious moments of your time. Whereas if you would have modeled that out ahead of time and understood what it was going to do in the software, you'd get the outcomes that you wanted quickly. I started my career as an electrical engineer, and we had a thing called PSpice. And in PSpice, you went in and you figured what that chip was going to do before you slapped it over into the fab and spent a bunch of money getting, 3 or 4 of them spit it when it doesn't work how you want it. So, we're finally getting PSpice for the operations guys. We call it digital twins. Let's enable them with it so there's some predictability into what they know the change is going to look like. And that way, there's a much greater adoption of those technologies because they get their hands on to understand what's going to happen. And that includes the digital people inside that as well.
And driving efficiency, I think, is one of the keys, isn't it, in demonstrating that predictability as well? Because, I think of, for example, a printing press, people still get business cards printed. And there are plenty of these larger printers that offer it online. So you go and order your, 250 business cards and they come to you. But as a printer, in an efficiency model, to go through that process individually each time is costly and exhausting for the people that are performing that operation. Whereas if we get 50 people who might not be, well, in this case, are not known to each other, have no relationship with one another, that all want 250 business cards at the same time, if we can group all of those together and print them, we create efficiencies in the operations and ultimately then efficiencies in the cost that's part of it as well. But being able to facilitate that whilst in something as simple as business cards isn't that difficult and has been done for a couple of years now. And at some of these other businesses, driving that same concept can be a lot more challenging, can't it?
Yeah, and I got a rare opportunity to work with Lego whenever they were doing the transformation from you buy it in the box to you go online, tell us what you want, and then we'll spit one of those out and we'll ship it to you. Now think of what that means. Okay, that was disruptive, and it was disruptive to a level that was actually almost the impact was so huge. They didn't expect the uptake to be as high as it was. You know how branding and marketing works, and that goes to sales, and then operations has to deliver it. So there were some things they had to shuffle around quickly because the demand was really high. Just so happens kids like to dream and they like to figure out what they want. And man, they were just, oh, I'd like one of these and one of these and one of these. That construct for one of these and one of the materials production, I'm going to say the action from the material consumption. Now, plastics is a little lot to be able to deliver those key things, like you said, business cards or intermingled batches inside a manufacturing process. The reason we do manufacturing the way we do today is because it's a lot of times so much human operated. And the human operators say, I got to drop a line, I got to get the line up, and then I'm going to put, Ford fenders for an F-150. And then I'm going to do Chevy fenders for a Chevy 135 or whatever that is. And then I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do, right? And the efficiency of how you're doing that batch processing and what you're going to do on the line to make that batch processing work, the tools to make those things happen when the sophistication comes, and it's coming, that sophistication, having something that can make sure you've got the right things happening as you time it through. It's much like the example you gave of the business card. I'm just going to print 300 business cards. 10 are this, 100 are this, 50 are this, 50 of this, and 90 are this. Boof, 300 cards. And those are going to spit out the back end with all the right print, all the right label, all the right paper, all the right stuff on them. That construct of interleaving that manufacturing process and how to do that interleaving is going to become crucial for us to keep up with what's going to be the future of our demand systems. The digital enablement of that, the construct for how we take that fulfillment of the order through that, the goods that we have to procure to put it into finished goods, and make certain it goes through the line, and that line processing and doing so in an efficient manner is going to be extremely important for us to work out and figure out how to do. One of the things that China got a head start on industrial manufacturing because they did it at such scale. And for better or for worse, they're better at industrial scale manufacturing and mixed batch sizes than we are in an efficiency manner that we have got to catch up with. The rest of the world has to understand how to catch up to that and do that in a more effective manner. Those localized supply chains that have to send stuff out into their local markets and do so from what I'm going to call edge manufacturing, that will show up in the future, and get that out into the channel, are going to require levels of digital enablement that are different than what we do today with these big, massive manufacturing plants that are churning out things in big batches. That the materials printing, I'm going to use the word 3D printing because most people understand this a little bit better. The sophistication there is rapidly increasing, like really, really rapidly increasing. And I think there's going to be a point at which that is going to affect how our manufacturing processes are going to do things, because it's going to commingle things that are done on these batch 3D printers, if you will, and things that are then final assembly to those. And the intermingling of those are going to require the sophistication you're talking about associated with digitally enabling those manufacturing plants.
Yeah, it is an area in terms of the operations that you really need to get on top of that idea of what is actually needed and where. I think that's the crucial bit here is knowing where are the areas that you can focus in on, because we can't underestimate as well, there is a human element to that often needs to take place, whether it's overseeing or whether it's creating new things, because that creation of new opportunities that happens out of some of these things in operations is also an important aspect.
Yeah, and the levers of invention, right, are often exposed as you move the thinkers up a level. So if I take you out of the mundane task of grabbing stuff out of the back of a truck and putting it up into a put away location, and you've been doing that for a while, but then I ask you to help me think about some things that we could do more inventively to actually add additional services. For example, it would be nice if we understood how to do the packaging around the custom things that I want packaged. And I'm going to go into an example. We worked with some folks in New Zealand. And what they would do is they would offer up these packaged gift sets. And the packaged gift sets would come in and they would be monthly they'd change every month. Okay. But that means I've got to have suppliers who can deliver on what I'm getting in the package, sometimes in a box, sometimes in a wood box, sometimes with a spoon, sometimes with something inside that box. So the packaging process that was invented to make that happen was from some guy in the center going, wouldn't it be nice if this thing could go out personalized instead of just, here you go, here's a bottle of whatever that I'm packaging up. That invention of what it looks like from that market guy who's in that market, who understands what the customers are going to look like, because he's out there, he's drinking a beer with folks who are talking about the product they bought. And then, it sure be nice if that's a great idea. I go back and I talk about it with the guys, right? So as you elevate them out of just the manual mundane task into being thought leaders around what your customers might want in that local market, they're great champions of how to A, understand it, B, what it might take to get it done. There's going to need to be a little bit of training because those are operations guys, and a lot of times they're not strategically thinking about all the other concerns. But, the international harvester story, when they took it out of bankruptcy, he brought everyone in the company and said, you're all going to be business people tomorrow, and here's what that looks like. And you better all understand what it takes to actually produce what we do, the costs associated with it, what you do to that cost. And so I think we've got to think about inventing our resources and making them more in the business and rather than just under the business. And this is a way to actually do that in an effective manner as you upskill them into those functional jobs, because you're going to be dealing with people at these plants.
One thing I just wanted to touch on in wrapping up the conversation on the operations and fulfillment side is also the supplier side, because that's an important aspect as well, that you're also, many businesses are reliant on some form of supplier that is performing, whether it's a service or offering a product that goes into your process. So the enablement to be able to communicate, to be able to make sure they can operate at the pace that you need to operate to fulfill as well is also an important area.
Yeah. If you think about the supply chain at an effective, I want to buy, that goes up to the distributor, that distributor then goes up to the wholesaler goes up to the manufacturer goes out to the raw goods, or what am I actually getting from my suppliers to put into the finished goods? And how am I optimizing that into the manufacturing process? If you think about all those components and what we have in place today and how arcane that process is at the current moment, if our banking system, which is a supply chain for digital money, right? No one's moving money around. It's just a huge supply chain. If our banking system, which is still highly inefficient, operated at anything close to what we're doing for what we do on our supply chain and how we actually ask suppliers to deliver stuff to us, it would just be disastrous to us economically. Now, everyone goes, well, that's just digital money. Well, a supplier, the source supplier, and let's just take a supplier that's building a specific part that you're going to consume and put into something that you produce. And let's say that part is a U-shaped joint, and then at the top of it, it's got a circle so that you can bolt some stuff into it and you can swivel it. Okay. That supplier has a process for getting that produced from raw materials that come from their supplier, because they've got to take that steel or whatever it is they're building it out of, and they got to produce that. The effects of that throughout that supplier relationship and the ability for that to move back and forth digitally and give signals in and out of that system are probably the second most crucial piece of the automated economy. Because the automated economy is going to surge. By definition, it's going to surge. Why? Because on Halloween, you're going to want to buy 100,000 Halloween costume. And while it's only in a couple of countries, there's other countries starting to adopt it. And so suddenly Halloween in Mexico here, where I'm currently sitting, they didn't have Halloween. They got Dia de la Muerta. But there's a whole bunch of people now going, that Halloween thing's kind of cool. I like putting on all the costumes. So this construct for how these things have to move up and down the system to say what I need and what I don't need, the automated economy will not get to the robustness it needs to without these supply chain enhancements to actually tell suppliers what I need without this process of manually going out and doing it. That purchasing guy cannot be the signal to say, I need more stuff coming from you. Now, let's talk a little bit about what makes that so difficult for us today, because a lot of people are really concerned about signaling to a supplier the units I need, committing to the purchase of those units, getting those units, and then determining that, the order quantity that I thought I was going to have is not exactly what I have. Therefore, I've got these supplies setting inside my warehouse that I don't need. This whole process around supply or demand planning, supply planning, and as it moves up and down the supply chain, this whole process in the effective rate of what's going to happen to move those things in and out is going to have to, let's say it's going to have to become about 10 times more productive than what it is today. Otherwise, the scale at which we can do stuff to do this effectively and make certain we're doing it without consuming so much stuff that we're just ripping the environment apart, is going to crush us. And what does that mean? When I go say that I need to consume 700,000 pounds of iron ore to turn that into steel, to cut that steel into the box that goes around something, and I do so, and I make a mistake on 5,000 of those and I can't use them, and therefore they have to go to scrap. The process for building that scrap, because you've been inefficient, has to become much more effective, that we've identified what that scrap looks like. There are people that'll buy that scrap and turn it right back into steel. So that whole feed and that whole chain of what we do to remove our uneasiness about committing to what we say we're going to do is all about that. You're talking about the printing of cards. The real-time process getting into your manufacturing system to say, what is it I really need to manufacture on line number 4? What are my lead times for the suppliers getting into that line number 4 to produce it? And how do I become super efficient at that inventory cycling? That's got to become, at a minimum, I was doing a big math paper for someone the other day. It's got to become 10 times more efficient than what it is today to get us to where we need to be as a world, as a globe, to not basically out-consume what we can produce before we can actually get off the planet to start to get some of the raw materials. So let's just say that we're probably 10 to 15 years before we can actually start to mine some of the outer limits, get some of the other things that we need. We're going to consume stuff at such a rate, we're not going to have anything left to keep up with what our consumption process looks like. So it's super critical, to your point, that we understand how to deal with what the suppliers need to bring in and how that has to be consumed in the supply chain.
And that's all for this episode of Get Enabled Digitally with Kramer from Cooperative Computing. If you found value in today's conversation about digital enablement, please subscribe and share with colleagues navigating their own transformation journey. For more insights on accelerating into the automated economy, check our show notes for resources and contact information. This show has been produced by podcastdoneforyou.online. I'm Anthony Perl, and until next time, keep moving forward to get enabled digitally.